The sign outside the bar read The Haven in flickering neon lights, a small, unassuming place nestled between a dilapidated bookstore and a pawn shop. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the dimly lit interior revealing worn, wooden tables and a long bar counter. I could smell the faint scent of aged whiskey and cigar smoke lingering in the air. It was my first night on the job, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stepped into another world. My name is Jack, and I just moved to the city, desperate for work and a fresh start. The Haven was hiring, and I needed the money. The owner, a grizzled old man named Gus, had given me a once-over and hired me on the spot. No questions asked, which seemed odd at the time, but I didn't care. Work was work. Gus was waiting for me behind the bar, polishing a glass. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes sharp and knowing. "You're on time," he grunted, nodding approvingly. "That's good. We've got a few hours before the real work begins." "Real work?" I asked, taking off my jacket and hanging it on a hook. Gus smirked. "You'll see." The first few hours were uneventful. A couple of regulars sat at the bar, nursing their drinks and chatting quietly. I learned their names quickly. Tom, a burly construction worker, and Maggie, a slender woman with a cloud of red hair. They were friendly enough, giving me tips on how to make their preferred drinks and sharing stories about the neighborhood. As the night went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The clock on the wall ticked closer to 10 p.m. and the bar started to empty out. Tom and Maggie finished their drinks and left, leaving just me and Gus. "All right, kid," Gus said, glancing at the clock. "Here's where it gets interesting. From now until closing, we have a special clientele." "Special?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. Gus nodded. "You'll see. Just keep an open mind and don't ask too many questions." I didn't have time to ask what he meant. The door swung open, and a figure stepped inside, tall and shadowy. As he approached the bar, I felt a chill run down my spine. The newcomer was unlike anyone I'd ever seen. He was tall, almost 7 feet, with skin the color of ash and eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. He wore a long, tattered coat that seemed to blend into the shadows. "Evening, Gus," the man said in a voice like gravel. "Evening, Sam," Gus replied, nodding. "What'll it be tonight?" "The usual," Sam said, sliding into a bar stool. I watched, fascinated, as Gus prepared a drink, with ingredients I didn't recognize, pouring a thick, dark liquid into a glass and adding a few drops of something that sizzled when it hit the surface. He slid the drink over to Sam, who took a long sip and sighed contentedly. "Who's the new kid?" Sam asked, glancing at me with those glowing eyes. "Name's Jack," Gus said. "He's new, but he's a quick learner." Sam nodded, his eyes lingering on me for a moment longer. "Nice to meet you, Jack." Nice to meet you too," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady. The door opened again, and more figures entered. Some looked almost human, while others were grotesque and monstrous. One had scales, another had fur, and yet another had wings folded against its back. They all greeted Gus as they took their seats, ordering drinks in low, rumbling voices. The bar filled with creatures of all shapes and sizes, each one more bizarre than the last. Some had tentacles, others had horns, and a few seemed to flicker in and out of existence. Despite their appearances, they all seemed to know Gus and treated him with a mix of respect and camaraderie. I did my best to keep up, following Gus's lead and trying not to stare too much. The drinks they ordered were as strange as they were, made from ingredients I couldn't identify. There was a green liquid that glowed softly, a thick red syrup that smelled faintly of copper, and a shimmering powder that Gus sprinkled over one drink like sugar on a pastry. As the night went on, I started to relax a little. The creatures were friendly enough, and the conversations flowed easily. They talked about their lives, their problems, and their adventures in a way that was oddly normal. It was like any other bar, just with more claws and fangs. I was pouring a drink for a creature with 3 eyes when the door swung open again. This time, the newcomer was different. He was tall and thin, with pale skin and eyes that seemed to pierce through the dim light. He wore a black suit that looked like it had been tailored for him, and his presence seemed to suck the warmth out of the room. "Ah, Mr. Black," Gus said, his voice a little tense. "What can I get you?" "Just a glass of your finest wine, Gus," Mr. Black said, his voice smooth and cold. Gus nodded and quickly poured a glass of dark red wine, handing it to Mr. Black with a slight bow. Mr. Black took a sip and smiled, revealing sharp, pointed teeth. "Perfect, as always," he said, his eyes flicking to me. "And who is this?" "Jack," Gus said, his voice tight. "He's new." Mr. Black's eyes seemed to bore into me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Welcome to the Haven, Jack. I'm sure you'll find it enlightening." After Mr. Black settled into a corner booth, the atmosphere in the bar slowly returned to normal. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease, but I tried to focus on my work. Gus must have noticed because he called me over during a lull in the action. "There are a few rules you need to know," Gus said quietly, his eyes serious. "First, never ask about their business. What they do outside these walls is their own concern." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "Got it." "Second, always serve Mr. Black first," Gus continued. "He's important." "Who is he?" I asked, unable to help myself. Gus's eyes flicked to Mr. Black, who was sipping his wine and watching us with a faint smile. "Let's just say he's a powerful man and leave it at that." I swallowed hard and nodded. "Okay." "Lastly," Gus said, his voice even lower, "never, ever go into the back room. That's where I keep the special supplies, and it's off limits to everyone but me. Understand?" "Yes," I said, wondering what kind of special supplies he was talking about. "Good," Gus said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Now get back to work. The night's just getting started." As the night wore on, I started to feel more comfortable. The creatures, despite their appearances, were just like any other patrons. They joked, laughed, and drank, and I found myself enjoying their company. Around midnight, a commotion at the door caught my attention. A large, hulking figure stumbled in, clutching its side. It was covered in dark fur, with glowing red eyes and sharp, clawed hands. Blood oozed from a deep gash in its side, staining the floor. "Help me!" it growled, collapsing onto a bar stool. Gus rushed over, grabbing a bottle from behind the bar. "Easy, Brutus. We'll get you patched up." I watched in shock as Gus poured a thick, blue liquid onto Brutus's wound. The liquid sizzled and smoked, but the bleeding stopped almost immediately. Brutus sighed in relief, slumping against the bar. "What happened?" Gus asked, his voice gentle. "Hunters," Brutus growled, his eyes narrowing. "They ambushed me on my way here. I barely got away." Gus muttered a curse under his breath. "Damn hunters. They're getting bolder." "What can we do?" I asked, feeling a surge of anger on Brutus's behalf. "Not much," Gus said, shaking his head. "We just have to be careful. The Haven is a safe place, but getting here can be dangerous." Brutus nodded, taking a long drink from the glass Gus handed him. "Thanks, Gus. You're a lifesaver." Gus patted his shoulder. "Just doing my job." The incident with Brutus shook me more than I wanted to admit. The idea of hunters targeting our patrons made my skin crawl. I found myself glancing at the door, half expecting more injured creatures to stumble in. Despite the unease, the night continued. The bar was lively, filled with laughter and conversation. I found myself getting to know the regulars better, learning their quirks and preferences. There was Layla, a petite woman with wings who loved sweet cocktails, and Gregor, a gruff, bear-like creature who preferred his whiskey neat. Around 2 a.m., the bar began to empty out. The creatures bid their farewells, disappearing into the night. One by one, Gus and I started cleaning up, the silence almost deafening. After the night's chaos. "You did good, kid," Gus said, handing me a mop. "Not everyone can handle a night like this." "Thanks," I said, feeling a sense of pride. "It's different." but I think I can get used to it. Gus chuckled. You'll have to. This place is special, and it needs someone who can appreciate that. I nodded, mopping up the bloodstain Brutus had left behind. What's with the hunters? Gus's expression darkened. They're a problem we've been dealing with for a long time. Some people can't stand the idea of creatures like our patrons living among them. They see them as monsters, threats to be eliminated. That's horrible, I said, feeling a surge of anger. It is, Gus agreed, but we do what we can to keep this place safe. The Haven is a refuge, a sanctuary for those who need it. I looked around the bar, feeling a sense of responsibility settle over me. I'll do my best to help. Gus smiled. I know you will. The next night, I arrived at the Haven with a renewed sense of purpose. I felt more confident, ready to face whatever the night would bring. Gus greeted me with a nod, and we got to work preparing the bar. At 10 p.m. sharp, the first patrons began to trickle in. The regulars took their usual spots, and I felt a sense of familiarity as I served their drinks. The night was off to a good start. Around midnight, the door swung open, and a newcomer stepped inside. He was tall and thin, with pale skin and dark, hollow eyes. He moved with an eerie grace, his long fingers tapping a rhythm on the bar as he took a seat. What can I get you? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The newcomer's eyes flicked to me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Blood. Fresh if you have it. I hesitated, glancing at Gus. He nodded subtly, and I turned to the fridge behind the bar. Retrieving a small vial of dark red liquid, I poured it into a glass and handed it to the newcomer, who sniffed it appreciatively before taking a sip. Perfect, he said, his voice smooth and cold. Thank you. I nodded, feeling a sense of relief. The newcomer's eyes lingered on me for a moment longer, before he turned his attention to his drink. As the night wore on, I noticed the newcomer watching the other patrons with a keen interest. He seemed to be studying them, his eyes tracking their movements and conversations. It made me uneasy, but I tried to focus on my work. Around 2 a.m., the bar began to empty out. The regulars bid their farewells, disappearing into the night. The newcomer lingered, his dark eyes still observing everything. Can I get you anything else? I asked, trying to sound casual. The newcomer smiled, revealing sharp, pointed teeth. No, thank you. I've had my fill for tonight. With that, he stood and glided to the door, disappearing into the darkness. I watched him go, feeling a sense of unease settle over me. The next few nights passed in a blur. The bar was as lively as ever, filled with laughter and conversation. The regulars greeted me like an old friend, and I found myself enjoying the work more than I had expected. But the unease I felt from the newcomer's visit lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing, a threat that was growing just out of sight. Gus seemed to sense it too, his eyes always watchful and alert. One night, as I was cleaning up after closing, Gus pulled me aside. We need to talk. What's going on? I asked, sensing the tension in his voice. Things are getting worse, Gus said, his expression grim. The hunters are getting bolder, and there are rumors of a new leader, someone who's organizing them and making them more dangerous. I swallowed hard, feeling a knot of fear tighten in my stomach. What can we do? Gus sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. We have to be vigilant. We need to protect our patrons and ensure the Haven remains a safe place. I nodded, determined to do whatever it took. I'm with you. Gus clapped me on the shoulder. I know you are. Just remember the rules and keep your eyes open. The next night started like any other. The regulars filtered in, the bar filled with the usual mix of strange and fascinating creatures. The newcomer from before, who I'd learned was named Lazarus, returned and took his usual seat at the end of the bar. He continued to watch everything, with that unsettling intensity. Around midnight, the door burst open, and a group of armed men stormed in. They wore dark clothes and masks, their eyes cold and hard. The patrons froze, the jovial atmosphere instantly replaced by a palpable tension. This is a raid, one of the men shouted, brandishing a shotgun. Nobody move. Gus and I exchanged a quick glance. He subtly nodded towards the back room, and I knew what I had to do. I slipped away, unnoticed in the chaos, and headed for the room Gus had warned me about. The back room was filled with shelves of strange bottles and jars, ingredients for the otherworldly drinks we served. In the center of the room was a large, ornate chest. I quickly opened it, revealing a collection of weapons and items I couldn't even begin to identify. I grabbed a handful of the weapons and hurried back to the bar. The hunters were shouting orders, forcing the patrons to line up against the wall. Gus stood behind the bar, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "Stay back," the lead hunter shouted as I approached. "We don't want any trouble. We're just here to rid the world of these abominations." "They're not abominations," I said, my voice steady. "They're people, just like us." The hunter sneered. "You've been brainwashed, kid. These things are monsters." Before he could react, I threw one of the items from the chest, a small silver orb. It exploded in a burst of bright light, temporarily blinding the hunters. The patron seized the opportunity, springing into action. Brutus roared and charged, his claws tearing through the hunters with ease. Lila took to the air, using her wings to knock the weapons out of their hands. Gus grabbed a shotgun from under the bar and fired at the lead hunter, who fell to the ground with a thud. The remaining hunters quickly realized that they were outmatched and fled, leaving their fallen comrades behind. The bar was a mess, but we were safe. The patrons began to clean up, and Gus gave me an approving nod. The days that followed were tense. The attack had shaken us all, and the threat of the hunters loomed larger than ever. The patrons were on edge, and Gus and I took extra precautions to ensure the haven remained secure. One night, Lazarus approached me at the bar. "You handled yourself well during the attack," he said, his dark eyes studying me. "Thanks," I said, feeling a mix of pride and unease. "I have a proposition for you," Lazarus continued. "I've been watching you, and I believe you have potential. There's a network of safe havens like this one, places where creatures like us can find refuge. We need people like you to help protect them." I was taken aback. "You mean like a resistance?" "Something like that," Lazarus said with a faint smile. "We're not just fighting hunters. There are darker forces at play, forces that threaten us all. We need allies." I looked around the haven, at the creatures who had become my friends, and felt a surge of determination. "I'm in." With Lazarus's guidance, I began to learn more about the world I had stumbled into. The creatures who frequented the haven were just the tip of the iceberg. There were entire communities hidden away, living in fear of discovery and persecution. The hunters were a constant threat, but they were not the only danger. There were ancient beings and dark magic, forces that could tear the fabric of reality apart. Lazarus introduced me to others who shared our cause, humans and creatures alike, working together to protect their world. We trained in secret, learning how to fight, how to use the strange items and weapons that Gus had stored in the back room. Gus supported us, providing the haven as a meeting place and offering his wisdom and experience. He was a wealth of knowledge, having seen more than any of us could imagine. As the weeks turned into months, we grew stronger. We thwarted several hunter attacks, saving countless lives and earning the trust of the communities we protected. The haven became more than just a bar. It was a symbol of hope, a beacon in the darkness. The night of the final battle started like any other. The bar was filled with laughter and conversation, the patrons enjoying a rare moment of peace. But there was an undercurrent of tension, a sense that something was coming. Lazarus was the first to sense it. "They're here," he said, his eyes narrowing, "and they've brought reinforcements." We quickly mobilized, the patrons readying themselves for the fight. Gus handed out weapons, his face grim. "This is it, folks. Give 'em hell." The door burst open, and the hunters poured in, more numerous and better armed than ever before. They were led by a figure in dark robes, a man whose very presence seemed to distort reality. I knew instantly that he was the new leader. the one organizing the hunters. "Defend the haven!" Gus shouted, and the battle began. It was chaos. The air was filled with the sounds of gunfire and roars, the clash of steel and the hiss of magic. The patrons fought fiercely, their unique abilities giving them an edge. Brutus tore through the ranks of hunters, his claws a blur. Lila soared above, raining down attacks from the air. Lazarus and I fought side by side, our movements perfectly in sync. He wielded a sword of pure darkness, while I used the strange weapons from the chest, each one more bizarre and powerful than the last. The robed leader moved through the battle with an eerie grace, his hands weaving spells that left destruction in their wake. I knew we had to take him down if we were to have any hope of victory. "Cover me!" I shouted to Lazarus, and he nodded, cutting a path through the hunters. I charged at the leader, dodging his spells and swinging a weapon that emitted a bright, searing light. Our weapons clashed, and the force of the impact sent shockwaves through the room. "You're a fool to think you can stop us," the leader sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "You're the fool for underestimating us," I shot back, pressing the attack. The battle raged on, but slowly we began to gain the upper hand. The patrons fought with renewed vigor, inspired by our determination. The hunters fell one by one, their numbers dwindling. With a final desperate strike, I managed to break through the leader's defenses, plunging my weapon into his chest. He let out a howl of rage and pain, his body disintegrating into shadow. The remaining hunters fled, their leader's death breaking their resolve. The bar was a wreck, but we had won. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the haven, its rays filtering through the broken windows. The patrons, weary but triumphant, began to clean up the mess, repairing the damage and tending to the wounded. Gus approached me, a proud smile on his face. "You did good, kid." "Thanks," I said, feeling a sense of accomplishment. "We all did." Lazarus clapped me on the back. "You've earned your place here, Jack. You're one of us now." I looked around at my friends, the creatures who had become my family, and felt a sense of belonging I had never known before. The haven had become more than just a bar. It was my home. As the days turned into weeks, we continued to rebuild. The threat of the hunters was still there, but we were ready. The haven stood as a symbol of resistance, a place where all were welcome and safe. And so, life went on, the bar filled with laughter and conversation, the patrons sharing stories and drinks. I had found my place in this strange, wonderful world, and I knew that no matter what came, we would face it together. Years passed, and the haven continued to thrive. We faced many challenges, but each one only made us stronger. New patrons came and went, each one bringing their own stories and adding to the rich tapestry of our community. Gus retired, passing the bar down to me. I took on the responsibility with pride, determined to uphold the legacy he had built. The haven was more than just a bar. It was a sanctuary, a place where all were welcome and protected. Lazarus and I continued to lead the resistance, our bond growing stronger with each passing day. We trained new recruits, teaching them how to fight and protect their communities. The network of safe havens expanded, each one a beacon of hope in a dark world. And through it all, the haven remained at the heart of it all, a symbol of resilience and unity. It was a place where humans and creatures alike could come together, share a drink, and find solace in each other's company. As I stood behind the bar one night, watching the patrons laugh and talk, I knew that we had built something truly special. The haven was more than just a bar. It was a family, a home, and a refuge for all who needed it. And in a world filled with darkness, it was a light that would never go out. And through it all, the haven remained at the heart of it all, a symbol of resilience and unity. It was a place where humans and creatures alike could come together, share a drink, and find solace in each other's company. As I stood behind the bar one night, watching the patrons laugh and talk, I knew that we had built something truly special. The haven was more than just a bar. It was a family, a home, and a refuge for all who needed it. And in a world filled with darkness, it was a light that would never go out. Like and subscribe for more stories like this.